All right, friends, welcome back to another recording. This recording, or I should say episode, if you will, might take a little longer than the one that you saw for chapter 7. But I also want to draw your attention to the fact that we're skipping chapter 8. Much like one of the earlier chapters, we're not skipping it because it isn't super helpful. In fact, I love chapter 8. We're skipping it only because none of our course objectives are directly tied to it. So in the interest of your time, I'm focusing our lecture on everything that's tied to the course objectives. I do recommend you go back and read chapter 8. But as far as chapter 9, again, I hope you'll read chapter 9 as well. We're going to be focusing on interpersonal relationships. And if you remember from chapter 1 lecture, interpersonal means between two people. So this can be any type of interpersonal relationship, but we're going to focus on self-disclosure, relationship development, self-disclosure skills, managing relationship tensions, and then also relational maintenance. And as you can see just from those main points, why this recording might take a little bit longer. Again, I do hope that you'll read the chapter, so this lecture isn't meant to be in place of the reading, it's just meant to supplement it. Alrighty, so let's start talking about self-disclosure. Probably most of you are familiar with what this means. To self-disclose means to tell other people something about you. Um, Typically, we refer to it as, everything's self-disclosure if it's about you. But typically, when we talk about self-disclosure, we're talking about the most intimate details. And as you can imagine, um, not everybody needs to know all of our intimate details. Intimacy, again, as you can see here, is we're defining it as the feeling of closeness between you and somebody else, which may or may not be a romantic relationship. So that just sort of frames our conversation that we're having right now. So we're talking about sharing information, very personal information about yourself with one other person. For those who are not familiar, there is something called a social penetration theory, and it's depicted with an onion, and then we start talking about the layers of self-disclosure. I think this is helpful because it adds a little bit of clarity for those who really aren't sure where those boundaries are. We start initially on the outside of the onion, so it's called the peripheral layer. And you will have a homework assignment that asks you to really understand each of these layers. So I would read a little more if you still have questions. Peripheral layer is very sort of basic information that you might even share with strangers just while you're chit-chatting at the store or the bank or something. You may or may not be willing to share, or let's say with classmates, your age or the school that you're going to, maybe where you're from, those kinds of basic things that if you just saw somebody for 5 minutes would not be inappropriate to talk about. Intermediately, we move in towards the middle of the onion. It's really the middle layer. That's where we start talking about more personalized information that wouldn't be found like on a application form. It would be something you really would have to talk to me to find out. What kind of music do I like? Or politics, maybe. You might, with today's day and age in politics, I don't think there's a win-win situation to talk about politics that I can see, because even if you agree on your political beliefs, people agree to not like something else about the opposite party. So obviously that's up to you. So you may not want to share political beliefs with people you don't know really well, but something like that, that's more personal to you, would happen in that peripheral layer. And then the very central layer should be reserved for the people you do have intimate relationships or very close relationships with. These are we talked, remember in chapter 2 about self-awareness, self-concept, and self-esteem. When you talk through those kinds of issues, things that you're afraid of, things that you really value and hold true to yourself, but certainly how you see yourself, those are central layer topics, meaning, again, reserved for the people you have most intimate relationships with. Not everybody needs to know that. And I just stress that because I've had a lot of classes over the years in person, and students, we usually talk a lot, and there are some students who don't seem to know those boundaries, and they share a lot of personal information, and As you can imagine, it makes other people really uncomfortable. So if you're somebody who's like, I don't really know what those boundaries are, or how do I kind of navigate that? Here we're looking at the slide that shows some skills you can use in terms of self-disclosure. So one would be get to know your own thoughts and feelings. Self-awareness is like the starting place for everything. Two would be know your audience. Who are you talking to? Where do they fall in terms of intimacy? If they really are people you've just met, keep them on the outside of the onion, probably at least until you know if you should share more information. On the other hand, if they're people, let's say you're married and you don't disclose at that innermost level, how can the other person really get to know you if you don't share any of that? So know your audience. Try not to make assumptions about gender. And I would also say being sensitive to cultural differences kind of go hand in hand and also relate to knowing your audience. We can't assume that just because someone is, and really this says about gender, it's taken from our textbook, but we could replace that with sex or gender. Whether or not somebody is male or female doesn't mean they always, or he or she always responds a certain way based on what other males or females always do. So we want to try to avoid assumptions and give the person in front of us or near us the benefit of the doubt. And again, the same is true. We talked about culture. We can't assume that everybody from this particular group does things a certain way or will treat us a certain way. So we can give them the benefit of the doubt and disclose in a way that makes us still feel comfortable. And if we want to create a stronger relationship, we would move into some of those innermost topics. Don't force others to self-disclose. It's a two-way street really with self-disclosure. As I self-disclose, I want to be paying attention to how you're receiving that. Are you ready for it? Is it too much for you? Do you feel uncomfortable? Because if you do, even if I'm disclosing, let's say at the middle or intermediate area, and I see that that's too much for you, I can just ask, oh, hey, is that too private? Does that make you uncomfortable? And then we can have a conversation about it. And then if the other person doesn't want to share anything past a peripheral layer, I just have to respect that because each person needs to be comfortable with the process. When others do decide to self-disclose, especially if they go into those innermost layers and they tell you their biggest fears or dreams, that's really the time that we want to be paying attention. We want to listen actively and also, if we need to, show empathy. Empathy is like sympathy. Sympathy means, oh gosh, I feel bad for you. And empathy is, I feel bad because I know what you're going through. I can put myself in your position. So especially if somebody's having a very difficult time, we can express empathy to just even build intimacy through our self-disclosure. Okay. We also said we were going to talk about relationship tensions. There's something called a relationship dialectic. Think of dialectics just as like opposing forces or opposite ends of a spectrum. And they can represent tension between people if you're on opposite sides of that spectrum. So there are three spectrums, if you will, to consider for yourself. Where are you on the spectrum? And then where's your partner or friend or parent on that for the same topic? So the first is openness versus protection. Some people are open about everything. Talk, 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 talk. And some people are very private. They really keep all of their innermost information to themselves and maybe one other person. That could create some tension in your relationship if you are on each side of the spectrum. So again, it's helpful to know where you are and know where your partner, friend, parent is, and then respect where each other is, but then also try to figure out how to bridge that gap. Over the course of time, maybe I can keep some things to myself so that this person doesn't become uncomfortable, and maybe this person can try to share a little more so that we can meet in the middle. The second is autonomy versus connection. Autonomy is I'm a free spirit. I do my own thing on my own time. And connection is, yeah, but I want to be next to you all the time. I want to know what you're doing and I want to know where you're going. I want to be there with you, want to be touching you, that kind of thing. And again, the opposite ends of that spectrum, there's a long distance or far distance between those two places. So it would be helpful if you find yourself on that spectrum on the opposite end of your partner, to have that conversation to say, okay, this is where I am and this is what's important to me. This is where I am. How do we meet in the middle, or at least get closer together? The last relationship dialectic we would want to talk about would be novelty versus predictability. Novelty is spontaneous, fresh, new, exciting. Predictability is I plan down to the minute. Again, those are the extremes. This can also, as you can see, cause a lot of relationship tension. So again, you could have a conversation with the other person to figure out, okay, I know you're like spur of the moment. And let's say we're planning a vacation. Can we go ahead and plan the city and maybe the date so that I can take time off work? But then let's just see what activities come our way, right? Once we get there. And maybe that's a good compromise to meet in the middle. Each of those, again, represents ways in which we can be disconnected or have a lot of tension. Our parents, people in those intimate relationships with us. The book also gives us some strategies for how to maintain positive relationships. So one of them would be to give what we call an assurance. And that is when you actually take time to say or show the other person is valuable to you. And there's a book called Love Languages. I haven't actually read it yet, but different people respond differently to appreciation or, love from others. Assurances are the extra effort we make to ensure the person is aware. It may be worthwhile to figure out what the other person, especially if it's a dating relationship, what that person likes. Does the person like to hear it or see it or like have you do something? But assurance, everybody responds well to assurances. And when I say assurances, I don't mean the thing where you say I love you every 10 seconds. Okay, cool. I love you. Thank you. I love you. Okay, I love you. Bye. That's not really an assurance as much as something else that we won't get into right now. But it is the overt effort. And I think it's easy to, if you're in a relationship with somebody for a long time, to forget to do that. So that could be one strategy to maintain a relationship. Second would be to try to be positive and see things from a positive perspective. I realize that's not always easy, but certainly the more effort we make to do that, the better outcome we can try to have. Third would be what we're talking about, which is self-disclosure. Again, with the right people in the right instance, self-disclosing can bring the two people together because, if you know all of my how I feel about myself and let's say my fears and desires or dreams, gosh, kind of all there is to know, or at least a good amount of it, right? And if you're open to hearing that and then you disclose the same, of course we're going to be more connected. And if we are more connected, we are more likely to be positive, and maybe even give each other assurances because we're more connected. So those would be three good strategies. The visual that you see here is actually, as you can see, taken from the text for our chapter. So we talked about, in terms of managing interpersonal relationships, we talked about self-disclosure. We talked about relationship development. We talked about self-disclosure skills, managing those relationship tensions, and also how strategies for maintaining a relationship. I hope you found that interesting, or at least maybe a little bit, or helpful. And I hope that you guys will do the reading, and I can't wait to read your homework assignments, and good luck on the quizzes. Bye, everybody.